All right, welcome back to SecurityGuideTV.com here on live stream at, well, that's a preposition, I shouldn't have said that. Broadcasting from SecureWorld 2017 in Seattle, Washington. My next guests, Paul English, CEO and co-founder, and Lee Fisher, CTO. Don't get many CTO interviews. I'm glad to have you here. Of PreOSSec.com, PreOS Security, Inc., and that's pre-operating system, correct?
Yes,
See how
that's
smart
correct.
I am?
Yeah.
They didn't tell me that before the show, trust me. Let's talk about what you guys do. You're a startup. I'm really excited. I always like to talk to startups because I know one day you guys are going to be big and then say, oh, I remember when we were on Security Guide TV. So tell us what you guys do.
So we do platform firmware level security. So you can think of it in broad terms like an antivirus or anti-malware, but for the firmware, for the chips on your motherboard. In our case, we're focusing on Intel UEFI and BIOS systems first.
Okay.
But we'll cover all the chip-based firmwares on your system, PCI, USB, and so on.
So back in the day, I didn't like Dell computers because when it broke, I had to go get a chip, but it's all proprietary, and only Dell's worked, and blah, blah, blah. And that was a security idea back then. It was a concept to keep things proprietary so nobody can get in my stuff and mess with it. Are we still there, or are people saying, you know what, we got to kind of be a little more open to make things work better for security in one way, right? But that makes you more vulnerable. And I was, I have a small brain. I wasn't aware that you guys can do something at the board level unless you're the manufacturer. So tell us how that works.
Sure. At the moment, we're still very much in that space. A lot of the firmware level stuff, you literally pull the chip off and reflash it to update it. But as time is evolving, we've got flash memory now that can be updated dynamically. So, for example, your UEFI, your BIOS, can actually be typically updated, but with a proprietary program from the manufacturer.
Okay.
It appears to you as a binary blob,
right,
not as open source software. UEFI, which I keep referring to, is actually built around an open source core called Tiano Core, but every version you ever buy has got thousands, hundreds of thousands of lines of proprietary code all bundled up in a blob.
Right.
So so it is still very much in that world. And it also is still a world that moves very slowly. So updates come out slowly relative to your Microsoft zero-day patches that happen very quickly. The updates happen very slowly in this space.
So here's what I don't get. I've been told 85% of almost all code that people stick in all these apps and all these programs we're talking about, open source, right? And nobody decides to sit down and say, let's call the security programmer guy in here first. Let's have him put the first line of code as the security code. They put security on after they write all this stuff and put it together because, time to market. They say, well, if something happens, we'll fix it then. We got to get it out and make some money. I don't get that. It boggles my brain, all right, coming from a physical security side. You wouldn't, lock the door later, right? I mean, it's just, I don't get it. So when we're on the board level, and we're doing this stuff way down at the board level, who are the type of clients that are going to use your product? This seems very unique to me. I haven't heard of this. I've done hundreds of interviews in this area. I haven't heard of this before. This seems like you're getting to the root of the security problem right there.
Sure. Well, I'll start with what we know about this area right now. A lot of the exploits that have come out have been NSA, CIA, Hacking Team was a very famous one. So these are very much state-level actors, state-level threats. Right. So the people that are going to be most interested in our product are going to be critical infrastructure or people who have a state level as part of their threat model. So maybe defense contractors, people like that. Your average enterprise isn't yet very concerned with this space.
They should be, though,
They
right?
will be. I think they should be.
Right.
But they're not yet very concerned with it. It is very much a narrow and deep area to be worried about. But obviously, as enterprise fleets have gotten more mobile, people are letting their hands off of their hardware, and now you're vulnerable to that kind of attack. Since some of these kinds of updates are very much a hands-on attack, but since many of these chips can now be updated from within the operating system, it's still quite possible, and we'll be seeing more of you get your average operating system virus that then infects at the firmware level, and any firmware it can access using the normal update mechanism. It's like, well, we'll just flash a new update, and that one now has malware in it, and you can go and wipe your operating system, and the malware will still be there. It'll reimplant itself from the chip level.
So really, the mobile chips is where the problem is mostly. I mean, or do you think it's also desktop? Really?
It's present on. It's literally present on everything.
I mean, it's present, but I mean,
mobile,
are the
mobile.
attack vectors more mobile? Because big corporation gives me my cell phone. Well, I bring my own cell phone to work, BYOD, and I just get on the web and I got to look at my porn and my gambling at work, and now I just open up the whole company to a bunch of stuff.
Right.
Are those the attack vectors because the employees are stupid using their phones for company business, or is it still my home computer? Let's get Mr. Lee talking about that. I know he's just begging to say something. Go ahead.
I'd say that the attacks are pretty much on all computers. I wouldn't say they're mostly mobile. The same kind of malware that you get on your desktop would be similar to what you'd find on mobile devices. The difference is with firmware level malware, it's more difficult to install, persist. So
I see. Okay.
So you have to copy yourself to a piece of flash versus just writing yourself to the onto a file on the disk. And it also gets a little bit more tricky now that the security technologies make it harder to use to configure systems. Things like SecureBoot on PCs and verified boot on Android devices makes it harder to hook into there. And you were saying where nobody cares. I'd say one reason is things like PCI compliance. Companies don't look at firmware. Right, they just look at operating system level.
It's so weird to me.
Yeah.
See, now
so
is
critical infrastructure would be people that care about that.
Yeah.
Everyone should, but the problem is PCI compliance says basically you can't have malware in your system. Well, most people now define that to be malware in your operating system, but not your firmware. So
is this really a manufacturer problem, or is it a compliance problem? Is it a integration problem? I mean, where's the root of this?
Vendors are making insecure systems still. There's only a handful that are making better systems. There's a tool called ChipSec that was originally created by Intel. Now it's part of McAfee. It is kind of a UEFI, ACPI firmware vulnerability detection tool, and they usually update it every year at DEF CON when new vulnerabilities come out. Corporations should be using that to check for their own for their systems to see if they've got malware. But the UEFI forum asks OEMs to be running that tool as part of their QA before they release machines. Unfortunately, most modern machines still fail ChipSec, which means the OEMs aren't writing that test. They aren't doing sufficient testing before they release it.
So let me take you back to the physical security world. There's a organization called ONVIF, and don't ask me what it stands for. But what they do, and they don't even know, by the way. I asked them last year. They weren't sure anymore. It's too long gone. But what they do is this. They get Sony, they get Pelco, they get the major, Panasonic, the major camera manufacturers together, and they say, look, you guys, Panasonic, do you remember that you put password 01 as the password on your 1 million cameras you sold? Well, guess what? We all got hacked to death, and now those cameras are, being used because you didn't put something on there. Can we have a standard? And so all the companies get together and they say, you know what? We're going to have an ONVIF standard. 1 means, password protection. ONVIF standard 2 means this. And all the manufacturers agree to create a standard that's uniform across the organization. So everything is plug and play with cameras, and they're more secure, and a whole bunch of other things, by the way, right? This is where I think this part of the industry maybe needs to go. Where, board manufacturers need to say, you know what? We're not just going to let you put anything you want out there. You're going to have to follow some guidelines and make sure that those chips are all secure before they go out the door and in somebody's phone or computer. Any work going that way?
Yeah, so there's some fantastic work in this space from NIST. They're coming out with or have just come out with a new standard in that space. And when we're talking about NIST standards, in this case, they're more like white papers / instruction manuals. It's not just checkboxes.
Yeah,
it's basically
they're not a green, but it's a compliance guideline that a good guy is going to say I'll do it.
Yes,
and a cheap guy is going to say until I get sued I'll do it. Yeah.
But you kind of get back to one of the bigger problems in this space. It's similar to the IoT space in that the margins are razor thin. And
that's right.
Once you've sold something to somebody, there's no ongoing revenue coming from that thing.
Right.
So once you've sold a motherboard, it's sold. So the cost of fixing security problems down the line is pushed back upstream into the original sale cost. It's a huge problem. So like if you can push out a thing, you can sell somebody something, and then never fix it. That's actually
that's
make more money.
Sure. I mean, you used to camera installers would come around, sell you a camera, plug it in, and it would be a photo of a head this big, taking something. What was it? And I go at the studios. I go, what? This camera's useless. I know my laptop's stolen because it's not here. I need a picture of the guy, right? And you never see the guy again, right? This happened. Now, I'm a red-blooded, all-American capitalist. I'm actually nonprofit, not by choice, by the way. But I'm trying to make some money, just like you guys. I get all this stuff, right? What about, I don't know, can we make money at open source? Can we make money giving this stuff away at some level where there's a part of the security section industry where this part that's free, that's given away, because it benefits every single company, we're going to pay those guys somehow. I don't know. We got to come up with a way to do this so you guys make money that are trying to make these things happen. Because like I said, the manufacturer pushes it out the door and says, I'll update that in the next model next year.
Yeah, so you asked a little bit earlier about open source in this space, and I think it's actually some pretty exciting stuff happening there. So I'll go ahead and plug our little product first. We're gonna release basically our client software as open source.
Okay.
And allow anybody to use it.
Oh, good.
What we'll be selling, like most open source business models, more is support for enterprises.
Okay.
But our enterprise client will probably have some stuff for which there will be specific stuff that we can't release open source because of NDAs and so forth.
Yeah, makes sense.
But for the most part, we'll try to make the open source version as complete and fully functional as possible, and useful to especially to
See,
consumers.
I got to take that model and figure out how to make money with this box right here, because I just get on something that apparently I wasn't even aware of. So you can make money on the other side. I never thought about that. Well, you guys are the brains. I'm going to give you the code. Oh, I don't know how to use the code. Okay, pay me to use the code. Makes sense. Or more or less.
More like pay me to pick up the phone and call me when you need help.
Yeah, makes sense.
But we will try to make it as usable as possible. So anyway, look for that coming out from us soon. But more in the whole space of firmware, I'm personally excited because I think the thing is the firmware has evolved in complexity to the point where, like, UEFI, for example, is virtually its own operating system.
Okay.
The IoT stuff is all actual embedded Linux, for example, is actually an operating system. But either way, firmware is moving up the software stack in complexity, and slowly as that's happening, hardware manufacturers who are embedding these firmwares everywhere are slowly beginning to realize and accept the benefits of open source software. So in the world of operating systems, Linux has kind of taken over the world.
Oh, interesting. I know that.
Oh, in terms of where it used to be, where proprietary was the default, and you never got to see the source code and so on. Now you can run Linux on almost any hardware. All the hardware manufacturers take Linux very seriously, but they're still at the lower level. They're still doing binary blobs for things, for low-level drivers and for firmwares. Those are the still attitude is still, I need to protect my intellectual property, and how I do that is by releasing a thing that nobody can see the code of. But the reality is that most of that code is not actually super secret or super safe or secret sauce. And just like as Linux slowly evolved and took over people's mindshare, I think that will happen at the firmware level as well.
All right, that's good news.
And it is beginning to. I think Tiano Core open source code base for UEFI is the beginnings of seeing that. It's just that people haven't said, well, maybe these proprietary extensions that we're adding onto that, maybe they don't need to be like binary blobs as well. We can actually release those open source too, and make our money by selling support or some other selling hardware. Right? These are hardware vendors, right? So they should be making their money from hardware, not from selling binary blobs or trying to protect their, it's short-sighted, I think.
So every time I do a show, I come away with two things. I say, wow, that makes me feel great. I feel safer. Or I go, ugh, I don't know. I feel unsafe now. I feel safer. I've always thought about this in the back of my brain ever since I couldn't get that stupid BIOS thing fixed on my Dell way back. It pissed me off. Why is this proprietary? Blah, blah, blah. But I feel good that somebody's looking at this and working on this. I mean, that's such an important part of a computer to mess with people. I used to take the CMOS battery out of a computer, and nobody could figure out how to fix that. What's wrong? My computer's not working. Just take the little, remember the CMOS battery? Do they still do they have them still?
Yeah, they're still there. Now you can't swap them out so easily. They're just physically built in, and they last longer. But
the smartest guy at Fox couldn't figure out what was wrong with the computer when I took out that battery, because that's just, they didn't know how to build them. I used to build them using that company called Zoom back in the day, put them together and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So this is all really cool stuff. Lee, I know you got something else to say. Tell me now, as a chief technical officer, what's your big focus? That's different than a CISO.
My focus these days is finding the latest open source tools that can be used in our. We wrap our client wraps existing open source tools, and we also have to write new tools for gaps that aren't available in the open source
Black
tools.
Duck, go see Black Duck. My friends at Black Duck Software.
Okay.
But I think they're the best in the biz. I've interviewed them a couple times. And tell them Security Guy TV sent you over there because they really are on top of that stuff, checking the open code.
We have to sometimes talk to OEMs and get NDAs for some of the closed source components.
Yeah.
Like there's a thing called HSTI, which is Microsoft proposes this in OEM machines. It provides health check data, but it's just a blob. You have to have an NDA to understand what the blob means, for
Right.
example. So my job is mostly building tools. You were talking earlier about open source. The tool I mentioned earlier, ChipSec, is one of
Yeah.
our first tools that we're using. It is open source, so Intel's providing this tool. It's a GPL open source tool. We're calling that, and there's a handful of other tools that are useful as well. So
So here's my last question I ask everybody. What keeps Lee Fisher awake at night? What do you worry about the most in this world, in this business?
getting my client out. I'm a few days late on it, so getting it out as soon as possible. That's my main thing right
All
now.
right. And Paul, what do you worry about the most? What keeps you up at night that you go, oh boy, I got to fix that or something?
Well, I think as a startup in the security space, I'm worried about all sorts of stuff, and probably don't get much sleep at all in the security space. But at the startup, I really have to worry about the business side of things.
Yeah.
And what I'm worried about is that not enough people will care enough about this part
That's
of the problem.
an excellent point. That's an excellent point.
Right, I care about it, obviously.
Right.
But will CIOs, CTOs, CISOs care enough to invest in this part of their security infrastructure?
It's
a huge space to cover. It's
Yeah.
mind-bogglingly hard, and this is just one more thing for a lot of people. Yeah.
Beta or VHS? It was the argument back in the day. Everybody knew at the studio Beta was superior by 1,000 times, and everybody picked VHS, right? I mean, that stuff can happen because nobody cares about that, right?
Yep.
Very interesting. All right, Paul English, CEO, co-founder, and Lee Fisher, CTO, co-founder of PreOSSec.com. That's Preos Security Inc. You guys are out of Bellevue, of course. Are you out of Bellevue?
Yes.
All right,
Yep.
that's good.
We're local here
Excellent.
in Seattle.
Well, thanks for coming
Or
on
Bellevue.
SecurityGuyTV.com, and we're going to tweet this out and get it out. And you guys, please come on the show and keep us updated with what's going on. You can just Google Hangouts and come into the studio remotely and talk about the latest thing. And let's get people to care about this. I think it's a serious thing to care about.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Thanks.
All right, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.